All right. So, hi guys. Good to see everyone, even though I can't actually see you. Today we're going to be talking about the poetic square. This is going to go a little bit differently than some of the other craft talk videos that I've done. I am dabbling a little bit in some technology. Be proud of me. Um, but we are going to use Zoom to screen share, and we're going to talk about the poetic square. The poetic square is something that a lot of intro teachers use, and it's sometimes called the poetic triangle, but it kind of shows the main elements of what makes up a poem. It kind of shows the main elements that writers tend to do. Well, you'll see. So I'm going to click screen share. We're going to go over here. I found this cool little place called Cami that lets me kind of mark up all of these things. But as you can see here, there's the poetic square. So these are four main things that poems are made of. And what's kind of fun is to kind of see where you fall in these parts of the square. So first we have music. So music, if you guys have listened to that craft talk video already, that talks a lot about meter, so that's rhythm, the rhythm within the line. Then we have sound imagery, and if you guys remember from that craft talk, sound imagery is not, images of a music or images of a song in a poem. Sound imagery is the actual sound that the words make. So they may be some distant rhymes, more spread apart, some slant rhymes, or maybe some, consonants that you've really loaded into a stanza, like that sound that was in the last video, or lots of sounds. So that's kind of sound imagery. Rhyme kind of goes with sound imagery. If you're, a hardline rhymer, this is something that you're going to be more tend to do. If you're, a slant rhymer. And then we have repetition, and repetition is not just, starting the stanza with the same line over and over again. I don't think I touched on repetition very much in the craft talk videos, but repetition is a good way to keep a running theme in your poem, kind of recycling images within your poem, but doing it in a new and fresh way. We have an example poem this week that uses repetition in a very smart way, I believe. It's important to, when you are doing repetition, don't use the same phrase over and over again. Maybe use that same phrase twice and then throw in a little bit of variety just to kind of mix it up. You always want to keep the reader on their toes. But repetition, because it's auditory, it's something that sparks our ear, that is going under music. Now, if you're someone that is a lot more musical, like you play guitar or you sing, and you really are like an auditory learner, and you have a lot of pleasure for auditory things, this may be more up your alley. You may be stronger in the music realm of this square. Everyone is going to be stronger in different areas. Everyone's going to have weak spot in different areas. But if we move along, we go to logic. So I touched a little bit on logic in one of the earlier videos. So logic contains those nugget of truths that we were talking about. What are the universal truths? What are we trying to learn from this poem? Logic also includes the so what element. Why did I read this poem? Why should I care? It's kind of the really hit hard aspects of your poem that make people really think. Research also goes into logic. And this is a newer thing that I did not touch on in the craft talk videos, but say you are writing a poem in the voice of Marie Antoinette from pre-revolutionary France. You can't go in there having not researched anything about Marie Antoinette, right? You're gonna have to do a little bit of research into her, and that is a part of writing smart poetry. So if anyone likes writing persona poems where they actively put themselves in the shoes of another character and use a first person in that poem, research is fundamental. Even if you're not necessarily picking a character from history or someone specific, but you're kind of picking, say, a working class person from the coal mines of Virginia in the early 20th century. I just read a poetry book on that this morning, so that's kind of where my mind is going to. Then the author of that book, she didn't pick one specific person in history. I couldn't find any of those people in history for the most part. They're made up names, but each character has different poems in the book, and they have different personalities. They talk differently, but all of them kind of have that lower class West Virginia accent from the really early 20th century. So she couldn't have gone in and done all this writing without having like research to back it up. What were the coal mines named? What were some of the company names there? What were the mountain names? You know, what were the chronic diseases that happened to coal workers? So research goes into it. And it's a way to get your reader to trust you and trust your authority as a writer if you put your research in. So if a reader fact checks you, you can snap right back and be like, I got my stuff. And then wordplay is also a really good part of logic. Wordplay could go in music if you wanted to. I tend to put it more in logic because it requires the thinking mind, and it kind of sparks our brain a little bit when we see a cool wordplay. And if you watch the Craft Talk video on form, I talked about wordplay a little bit in line breaks. That's a great way to use play on words. But you can also do wordplay with the sound of the word. Again, in this book that I was reading this morning, it was called Kettle Bottom by Diane Gillum Fisher, if anyone wants to read it. I found it at some random bookstore in Asheville for like $2, but I get off track. She likes to play on the different words of mine, as in the mine that you get coal from, and the word mine, like the possessive mine. And so you have a lot of words that have, double meanings. And so wordplay just kind of sparks us intellectually. It shows that you understand language and that you really take pleasure in playing with language. And so I would say people that tend to be more logical are thinkers, people that are really into kind of philosophy and, rights and wrongs of the world, even people that keep really up to date on history, on the news. You're kind of in the now and in the know, wordplay right there, of everything that's going on. And so you can pack a lot of that thinking mind into the poem. Now, the next category is story. So story is basically the story of the poem. It's pretty self-explanatory. This could also be called just narrative. But every poem should have some type of underbelly, some skeleton of a story. And when I talk about narrative progression right here, that is the story that is pushing the poem along. As readers, we don't want to end up in the same place we started. We want to move to somewhere. So whatever that story is, there needs to be some sort of movement, even if it's just like minuscule. If you have a really short poem, just take us one step further. Don't just have us, standing in the same place that we began. So that's narrative progression. Tone we touched on, and that is the emotion behind the words. So I could talk like this and be like, yeah, I'm your teacher for this course. I kind of sound snotty, but if I talk like this and I'm your teacher for this course and I'm so excited, that's much more bubbly, much more cheery. So tone is our way of showing voice inflections via the language that we choose. Voice is a little bit different. As we touched on, voice is it's more character based. So whoever your speaker is in your poem, you want to use a voice that is authentic and unique to them. You want to use language that is available to them. You don't really want your writer voice to bleed into your character voice. You want to kind of show a little bit of differentiation if you are doing poems that are in the style of somebody else or in a character. And then you have show, don't tell. So that is the age-old saying with writing, is that you want to show the story and not tell the story. So telling, and this can get a little bit confusing, but telling is like when your girlfriend is gossiping to you about this crazy thing that happened, and she's like, oh my God, girl, my boyfriend said this, and then she said this, and it's just them telling the story at you, right? But if she was like, so get this, I wake up in the morning, I go make my coffee, I see my man downstairs. So she, instead of telling you about it, he did this, she puts you in her perspective. Showing is when you take the reader behind the eye of whoever's POV it is. So you're actively putting the reader right there. So that's a really important part of storytelling within fiction writing, nonfiction writing, poetry even. You want to show the story and not tell the story. You want the reader to be actively engaged within it and not feel like they're being talked at. And then we have gaze and point of view. So we have one poem in the example pile this week that talks about gaze. And I didn't touch on this in the earlier craft talk videos, so that's why we're doing it here. But gaze is more of a character thing. It's thinking about, you know, the point of view of this person. So if I'm a child, my gaze is going to be a lot shorter. If I'm looking at an adult, I'm going to be looking up. I might notice maybe some nose hairs. I might notice some double chins, who knows? I might notice the tulle at the bottom of someone's skirt, right? You want to think about where you are in position. If you are at a coffee shop and say you work at the coffee shop, your gaze is going to be a lot different than the customer's gaze, right? So you want to think about the actual physicality of your speaker. And then also there could be a wide gaze and a narrow gaze. And so just think of that as kind of like a camera lens. And when you zoom in really close, you're getting a really narrow gaze. You're only able to look at one thing, but you're getting a lot of details by looking at it, right? So that could also be a tool to use in writing. Zoom in the gaze, see what details we can pick up. And then if you want to zoom out, you have a wider gaze. So if I'm zooming into this little screen right here, your gaze just got a lot smaller because it's just my face, and you could see that maybe I'm wearing white eyeliner and my nails are not done. It's a lot more, and yeah, I got a little highlighter on. So it's a lot smaller, right? But then if we zoom out, you see that there's a mirror, painting, candles behind me. You can see a lot more. So I think using variety in your gaze on in your poems can be really good. Zoom the camera in, zoom the camera out, because that's a part of storytelling. We notice little details sometimes, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we see the big picture. And so the story one, that is for my storytellers, people that love telling stories, love writing stories. I started as a fiction writer, and I fell in love with poetry and kind of ventured off there, but my work tends to be more story-based. I'm more of a narrative writer. And if you guys read the Elements of Poetry essay that I added to some extra reading, it's not, you don't have to read it, but if you just want to get some more material, it talks about the main three types of poems, which are lyrical, narrative, and description. In an effort to get you guys to read that, I'm not going to explain them. But I tend to be more of a narrative writer because I started by telling stories. So that's some people's strong suit. And then the next one, the final one, is imagery. So that's what poetry is kind of known for, is like these really, really beautiful, delicious images. And we talked about concrete versus abstract images in the craft talk video on description. And concrete are the really kind of real world objects and things that ground us down in the poem. And abstract images is kind of where you can let your freak flag fly a little bit and be a little up in the clouds, but you really want to keep a balance. You don't want the reader so high up in the clouds that they have no clue where it's going on in the poem, where they are. And if you just kind of leave them on the ground, leave them on the concrete, it's okay, but you want to add a little fleck of, rainbow to it, a little bit of abstraction to show that an image can go beyond, what it just is. You can take it a little bit further. And then we talked about high and low images. So high images are what society typically deems as beautiful. Perhaps you could say the mirror is a high image because it's kind of fancy and regal, and I'm in my mom's house right now, so she's got some nicer stuff, more antique-y things. But then we could talk about some more like lowbrow images that aren't as fanciful. You could maybe say my water cup, because look at all that peeling coming off. It's not like the cutest thing ever, right? And I'm obviously just kind of taking from my surroundings right now, but just to kind of show you the compare and contrast. And it's good to keep a balance, but I would really urge you guys to push yourselves when it comes to low images and kind of experiment. How can I elevate this? How can I make this beautiful? This, you know, typically deemed ugly or commonplace thing, just absolutely exquisite. And then you want to be, I'm going to jump down here to unique and specific first. So it's pretty self-explanatory. You want your images to be unique. You don't want to fall into any cliches or overused descriptions. Usually the more specific you go with an image, the more worldly it becomes, the more we can all relate to it. Because humans go through a lot of the same things as much as we don't realize it. But we really relate to each other, especially when you dig deep. So that one's kind of self-explanatory. But if we look here at images that live within, I'm really having fun with this drawing, live within the world of the poem. So I didn't talk about this in the craft talk video on images, but it's important to keep your images within the world of the poem. What that means. If you are writing on the circus, and say your speaker is a little boy going to the circus for the first time, and maybe it's the 1940s, back when the Ringling Brothers were really, really big. And circuses were kind of a whole shebang, and they'd come into town and everyone would get so excited. If you're writing about that, you wouldn't be putting anything about, say, okay, rewind that thought, skirt. Let's think about carnival food. How about that? I'm trying to do this offhanded off the top of my brain. If we're thinking about the food within a poem, and this little boy is, you know, eating different foods, he might be eating like some really greasy foods or like a funnel cake. He's not gonna say, oh, and I ate spaghetti at the circus. Something like that. That wasn't like the best example, but you want to keep images that relate to the poem. So images that live within its world. Oops, excuse me. How do I go back? There we go. Okay, sorry about that. There was a little bit of an issue with the technology thing. I told you guys I'm not the best with it. But when we were talking about images that live within a specific world, I thought of a good example. So if your poem is based in the desert, you're not going to talk about water balloons in the desert. You're not going to talk about, you know, sea urchins or dolphins. You're not going to compare something to a dolphin, right? And it's a hard concept to kind of understand. I'm having a difficult time explaining it. And the best that I can do is show you guys an example poem that recycles images. And that is going to be one of our craft element readings. But when we're talking about kind of what type of person is better at certain things, images are really for my visual people that maybe do visual art. Maybe you're an artist. And you like to kind of think outside the box. You really like to look really narrowly and specific at things. You like to see all the little details. You have a very interesting perspective on the world, and you like to imagine things. It's a very, very creative, imaginary kind of realm to live in. So if you're kind of a daydreamer, that also can be a part of, you know, imagery. So imagery may be your stronger suit. And like I said, everyone kind of falls on this board somewhere. And that's not to say one is better than the other. That is why they are equal. As equals, I tried to make it when I was building this square in weight and, you know, the amount of square they take up. But it's important that if you're really, really, you know, heavily skewed on the story side, that yes, you hone that in and you are confident in that and you take that with stride. But you want to make sure that you can bump up some of your other skills that aren't as sharp. For me personally, logic, I'm not the strongest with logic in my poetry. I will admit to my faults. It is something that I really admire when I'm reading poetry. I really, really love to see it because it's something that I don't have as firm a grasp on yet, because writing is a journey. It is constantly editing and revising and seeing what works, what doesn't work, what could be better. So nobody's perfect. Nobody is all four of these things. And if you are, I hate you. Just kidding. But yeah, so kind of see where you fall on this square. Think about the things that you write. Think about the way you see the world, what kind of pleasures that you like, whether it be auditory or visual, storytelling maybe. And just like, it's a little bit of food for thought. But I'm going to post a screenshot of this. And actually, I think I'll put it in a PDF to our page under some extra materials. So I'm going to stop the video share. And that is the end of this video. Sorry for the look up in the middle, but all right, thank you.